guys, welcome to Priceless B Movies. I'm your host, Colin Price. And man, I gotta say, if this is the worst movie of the year, we're having a pretty good year. The Crow. The Crow is a new film adaptation of the comics by James O'Barr. Stars Bill Skarsgård as Eric and FKA Twigs as Shelley. I would say Eric Draven and Shelley Webster, but actually in this version of the film, neither character is actually given a last name. They're just called Eric and Shelley throughout. I don't know if that was done on purpose to try to separate this from the original, but it was just something interesting that I noticed in the film. Eric and Shelley meet in a recovery facility where they've both got some drug stuff in their past. You know, he comes with a lot of trauma, she comes with a lot of drama. Isn't that how all great relationships first start out? Eventually, the two of them decide to bust out of the place, though, and start their new life and budding romance together. And for a little while, everything's kind of peachy keen. There are some really genuinely sweet scenes between these two. There are a couple of bits that I think went on a bit too long. I kind of appreciate that in this version of The Crow, we get some more time with Eric and Shelley before they die. But I do think that easily something like 5 to 10 minutes of that whole sequence could have been trimmed, and it wouldn't have really hurt the movie. There's one scene in particular that I know they could have taken out, but I digress. Not all is right in paradise, however, and eventually they are discovered and killed by a group of criminals led by Danny Houston because of something that happened in Shelley's past that I'm not going to get into in this review because I definitely deem it spoiler territory. Their souls enter the afterlife, and while her soul begins to descend into hell, his soul is kind of trapped in purgatory, and he's told, we're going to give you these abilities because what happened to you guys was real shitty, and you can go back and you can set things right by killing your killers. So when I was trying to think of everything I wanted to say in this review, I was really stern at first about not making any comparisons to the original movie. But now I'm thinking about it, there's really no way to avoid making at least a couple, just to kind of give you my honest opinion. I love the original Crow with Brandon Lee. It's one of the best comic book movies of the 90s, if not the best comic book movie of the 90s, next to maybe Blade. I will say that when I was a kid, so I was born in 1986. The Crow came out when I was 8 or 9 years old. So by the time it was on HBO, I was watching it all the time. I had the VHS, then I had the DVD, then I had the Blu-ray. I do intend to get the 4K. I only just found out a few days ago that this was on 4K. I'm definitely going to be getting it. I know the soundtrack by heart. If I had the time and you had the sanity, I would break into song and dance and perform every single song from that soundtrack without having to look up the lyrics. I just know it. I love The Crow. But, not trying to piss anyone off here, it ain't Raiders of the Lost Ark. It ain't Citizen Kane. It's The Crow. It's a comic book movie. Comic book movies are remade all the time. Now, I will say, I was a little skeptical about this one just because of how long it took them to get off the ground. They've been talking about making a Crow remake, reboot, readaptation for almost 20 years. At one point, Stephen Norrington, who directed the first Blade, was going to do this. And then at one point, it was going to be, I think it was Paul Walker, but then he passed away. And then it was going to be Jason Momoa at one point. I remember they leaked the images of him just basically in an Aquaman costume, but with the face paint. He kind of looked like Kane from WF. Or WWF, WWE. I don't know. I know nothing about wrestling. Bear with me here. But then when I found out that Bill Skarsgård was cast, I kind of just decided, hey, why not? This guy's a fantastic actor. I don't think I've ever seen Bill Skarsgård in something and not loved his performance. And I was thinking, the last time that this guy was involved in an adaptation of something that had already been adapted, it was It, Chapters 1 and 2. And he was amazing as Pennywise the Clown. So I'm not going to say, oh, it's not the original guy, so I'm not going to give this a chance, when I know that the lead actor has a track record of resurrecting and doing these great new interpretations of famous characters. And then, of course, we all saw the pictures, right, where he's got all the tattoos. And he's I wasn't crazy about it when I first saw those images, but I will say this. I'm always kind of on the side of, you can't judge a book by its cover. You know, the Joker, my favorite villain of all time, is a prime example of this. Look, when images of Heath Ledger first came out and it was the grease paint and not the perma white bleach skin, and it wasn't just the smile, it was the huge scarred smile and all of that. A lot of people, myself included, were not crazy about that. We thought, what the hell are these people doing? That's not the Joker, that's like a grunge rocker. What is going on here? This guy looks terrible. And then, of course, we all saw the movie. Same thing happened with the Joaquin Phoenix Joker. Once again, even I was guilty of this. I thought, he kind of looks like the Joker, but he also kind of looks more like John Wayne Gacy. I think what really matters is the performance. That's what's going to really make or break this. And I'm happy to say that Bill Skarsgård is by far the best part of this movie. He understood the assignment, just like he always does. I was constantly blown away by how good he was in this. I liked the look of the film too. Obviously, this looks nothing like the 1994 film, but I kind of like that about it. I kind of like that it has its own identity and its own visual style. For all the people out there who are complaining that, oh, it doesn't look like the 1994 film and these characters don't look like the... Frankly, I'm glad. Thank God they don't. I would have felt personally insulted if they had done everything they could to try to just emulate the Brandon Lee movie. I think that would have been more insulting than what they did here, trying to give it a new look and a new style. Plus, let's be honest, there's a lot of people who were going to hate this movie no matter what it did. Last pro I'm going to give this movie, one thing that I really did like that differentiates from the original film, is that, in that original movie, as good as it is, it does always kind of bother me how Eric is killed and comes back to life, and you don't know that much about who he was before his death. But I have a hard time believing he was some ballistic weapons expert and martial artist and all that. He just comes back and he's this godlike superhero. In this film, the Eric character is very traumatized. He's very timid. And when he comes back from the dead, it takes him quite a while to figure out how to utilize his powers and how to fight and how to take these guys on. It's really not until the last the third act of the movie that he's really kicking ass and taking names. And I liked that there were points where he would get gravely injured and you're having to watch him, pop bones back in, among other things. And it's a whole new take on that. I really liked that. In fact, this is a guy who's so unused to violence that when he fires a gun for the first time in the movie, his reaction to the gun going off is less "make my day" and more,
"Ow, my freaking ears!"
Getting to the cons, I don't think that the villains are nearly as good as in the original film. Frankly, with all the Crow sequels, I say the same thing. No one really touches Michael Wincott as top dollar in that first movie. I think Danny Huston does an okay job, but Danny Huston, I can't think of a movie or TV show that I've seen Danny Huston in ever where he wasn't the bad guy. So at this point, I just kind of accept that he's kind of sleepwalking through these roles. And he's okay. He's serviceable here, but there's nothing to write home about. Also, his henchmen, the other members of this group, I couldn't tell you a name. I couldn't tell you a personality trait. They're all kind of interchangeable. I miss the varied and really colorful villains of the first film. But I don't even know if that's that big a deal for me because this movie is so wildly different from the first one that just the focus isn't on the bad guys. Also, definite pacing issues. Like I said, as that love story is developing, I did enjoy that we got that much time with the characters, but I do think that some of it at least, could have been cut out. One scene in particular was completely unnecessary. Also, the soundtrack. The soundtrack for this one is nowhere near as good as the soundtrack for the first movie. But I will say there were a couple of points in this movie where there was a song that started or a track that started playing, and I was like, oh, that! I haven't heard that in years. I remember hearing that in this movie or, on this station when I was a teenager. That's really cool. I totally forgot about that song. I'm glad that that's in here. Now I've come to the point in the review where it's time for me to grade this movie. A lot has been said about this film. I'm going to come out and say this right now. A lot of things that are not true have been said about this movie. I'm here to tell you guys right now, in this film, Eric is not a mumble rapper. To the best of my knowledge, Bill Skarsgård has not said he hates this movie. This movie does not have to make $500 million or Lionsgate will go bankrupt. This movie cost $50 million to make. The Conjuring 2 cost about as much as it cost to make this movie. And finally, the one thing that really bugs me that everyone's saying about this movie that's just flat out not true. Oh, there's no violence or anything until the last 30 minutes of the movie. There's no action or anything. Bullshit. There's people, with their intestines coming out, bones snapping in and out of bodies. You get shootings, stabbings, people falling from great heights, people killing themselves, people doing whatever. Guys, I was actually really surprised by the amount of violence in this movie. And that's me talking. I watch violent movies all the time. This is more akin to, like a horror film a lot of the time than it is like a revenge fantasy. Also, and I do gotta say, when you do get to that big opera house battle at the end of the film, chef's kiss, man. Oh my gosh. That might be my favorite action sequence of any film this year so far. I don't even mind saying that. I've seen Furiosa, I've seen Deadpool, Wolverine, I love those movies. This might be my favorite action sequence of the year. The Crow's not a great movie, but it's not a terrible movie either. It certainly doesn't deserve all the hate that it's getting, although I do understand, like I said earlier, there are a lot of people who are going to hate on this movie no matter what it did. The Crow 2024 gets 3 stars. Go ahead, bring on the hate. I can take it. Thanks for watching. I got plenty more reviews coming. Stay tuned for more Priceless B movies.